The train lurched to a stop with a screech that set Evelyn's teeth on edge. She stood before the conductor could announce the station, not that there was much to announce. Through the smudged window, all she could see was dust and a single wooden platform that looked like it might collapse if you sneezed on it. "Cutter's Pass," the conductor called, eyeing her with the kind of curiosity that made her skin crawl. "You sure this is your stop, miss?" "I'm sure." She wasn't sure of anything, but she'd learned that certainty in your voice could cover a multitude of doubts. She gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that held everything she owned, which wasn't much anymore, and stepped down onto the platform. The heat hit her like a fist. It was nothing like the humid summers back east. This was dry, relentless, the kind of heat that baked the moisture right out of you. The train pulled away, leaving her alone in a silence so complete it felt aggressive. No bustling streets. No vendors calling out their wares. No polite society pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Just wind, dust, and a general store that looked held together by stubbornness and little else. A man leaned against a post near a wagon. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low enough that she couldn't see much of his face. He didn't move, didn't call out, just watched her with the patience of someone who had all day and no particular feelings about how she chose to spend hers. Evelyn straightened her spine and walked toward him. Her shoes, impractical, Eastern, already dusty, clicked against the worn boards. "Mr. Rourke?" He pushed off the post, and she got her first real look at him. Weathered. That was the word that came to mind. Not old, but worn in the way good leather gets worn, used hard, built to last. His eyes were pale, gray, or blue, she couldn't tell in the harsh light, and they took her in with an efficiency that made her want to fidget. "Miss Hart." It wasn't a question. He knew who she was because who else would be fool enough to get off the train here? "I appreciate you meeting me," she said, keeping her voice level. "The journey was longer than I expected." "It usually is." He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and carried it to the wagon. "You bring anything else?" "Just the bag?" He nodded once and held out a hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. She hesitated. Something about accepting help still felt like admitting weakness, but her pride wasn't worth breaking an ankle in these ridiculous shoes. His hand was calloused, rough, and he let go the second she was seated. The silence stretched as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. The wagon rolled forward, and Cutter's Pass, such as it was, disappeared behind them within minutes. Evelyn had imagined this moment 100 times during the journey west. She'd rehearsed conversations, prepared answers to questions she assumed he'd ask. Where was she from? What made her answer his advertisement? Did she understand what ranch life entailed? But Caleb Rourke didn't ask any of those things. He just drove, eyes on the road, or what passed for a road out here, and let the quiet sit between them like a third passenger. She lasted about 20 minutes before she broke. "Your letter mentioned you had a working ranch. Cattle?" "Some cattle, horses mostly, enough to keep busy." "How much land?" "Enough." Evelyn bit the inside of her cheek. This was going to be a long ride if he planned to answer everything in single syllables. "I should tell you," she started, then stopped. What should she tell him? That she'd never done a day of real labor in her life? That the closest she'd come to a horse was watching them pull carriages through Philadelphia? That she was running from a scandal so thick it had choked the life out of everything she'd known? Should tell me what? He didn't look at her, but she felt the weight of his attention shift. "I'm not experienced with ranch work, but I learn quickly, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "You afraid of anything?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about lying, spinning something noble and brave, but something about the flatness of the landscape, the emptiness of it, made dishonesty feel pointless. "Yes," she said, "I'm afraid of a lot of things." He nodded like that was the first sensible thing she'd said. "Good. Fear keeps you careful. Careful keeps you alive out here." The ranch appeared gradually, rising out of the prairie like it had grown there naturally. It wasn't much. A house that had seen better decades. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. A few outbuildings scattered around like afterthoughts. But it was solid, functional. The kind of place built by someone who cared more about whether something worked than whether it looked pretty doing it. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down. Evelyn followed, trying not to wince as her feet hit the ground. Every muscle in her body ached from 2 days of train seats and tension. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," he said, grabbing her trunk again. "Then we'll go over the work." The house was dim inside, cooler than outside, but still warm. The main room served as everything: kitchen, dining area, sitting room. Sparse furniture, nothing decorative except a single photograph on the mantel that she didn't get a good look at. Everything was clean but worn, used hard and maintained just enough. He led her to a small room off the main area. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out toward the barn. Simple, clean, more than she'd expected, honestly. "You'll take meals with me," he said from the doorway. "Breakfast at dawn, supper at dusk. You miss breakfast, you work hungry. There's a pump out back for washing. Water's cold, but it's clean. You need anything from town, we go on Saturdays. Otherwise, we're here." "What about—" She stopped herself. "What about what?" "The work. What will I be doing?" He leaned against the doorframe, studying her with those pale eyes. "Everything. Feeding stock, mending fence, hauling water, chopping wood, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. I work this place alone, which means I work dawn to dark and then some. You're here to help carry the load. Can you do that?" Evelyn met his gaze and didn't let herself look away. "Yes. We'll see." He pushed off the doorframe. "Get settled. Supper's in an hour." He left her there, and she heard his boots cross the main room and the door close behind him. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. What the hell had she done? She'd answered an advertisement. That's what she'd done. A simple notice in a Philadelphia paper, placed by a rancher out west looking for help. No romantic language, no promises of adventure or new beginnings. Just ranch hand needed, room and board provided. Hard work. Honest pay. Respond if interested. She'd responded because she'd had nowhere else to go. Because her name had been dragged through every parlor and newspaper in Philadelphia. Because Victor Hale had made sure of that. She pushed the thought away before it could settle. Victor was 3,000 miles behind her. He couldn't touch her here. That's what she told herself, anyway. Supper was beans and cornbread, simple but filling. They ate in silence at a rough wooden table. Caleb didn't seem uncomfortable with the quiet, didn't feel the need to fill it with small talk or pleasantries. Evelyn had spent her entire life in rooms full of conversation, where silence meant something had gone wrong. Out here, it seemed silence was just the default setting. "You cook?" he asked, sopping up the last of his beans with a piece of cornbread. "Some. Basic things." "That'll do. We'll split it. I'll cook half the week, you take the other half. Nobody goes hungry if we both know how." She nodded, filing that away. Practical. Everything about him was practical. "You got people back east?" The question surprised her. "No, not anymore." He studied her for a moment, then nodded like that explained plenty. "Dishes are yours tonight. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Door locks from the inside. Use it." He stood, put on his hat, and walked out into the dying light. Evelyn cleared the table and washed the dishes in a basin of cold water from the pump. Her hands were already sore from gripping the wagon seat too tight during the ride. She wondered how they'd look after a week of real work. Through the window above the basin, she could see the barn. A lantern glowed inside, and Caleb's shadow moved across it periodically, checking on the horses, probably, making sure everything was secure for the night. She dried the last dish and put it away, then stood in the empty kitchen and felt the weight of the day settle over her. She was here. Actually, here. In the middle of nowhere with a man she didn't know, gambling that reinvention was possible if you just got far enough from the person you used to be. The first scream woke her sometime after midnight. She bolted upright, heart hammering, struggling to remember where she was. Not Philadelphia, not her childhood bedroom, not... Another scream, and she realized it wasn't human. Animal. Something in distress. She fumbled for the lamp, got it lit, and pulled on her robe. When she opened her door, Caleb was already crossing the main room, fully dressed, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he said without looking at her. "What is it?" "Coyotes, most likely. After the chickens." He was out the door before she could respond. She stood in the doorway, watching his lantern bob toward the chicken coop behind the barn. More sounds, squawking, something vicious and quick, and then a gunshot that cracked across the prairie like thunder. Silence. She waited, gripping the doorframe, every muscle tense. The lantern moved again, back toward the house. Caleb appeared out of the darkness, rifle over one shoulder, something limp and dark in his other hand. "Got one," he said, dropping the dead coyote near the porch steps. "The other ran off, lost 3 chickens. I'm sorry." He looked at her like that was a strange thing to say. "Not your fault, happens. We'll reinforce the coop tomorrow." He noticed she was still in the doorway. "You planning to stand there all night?" "No, Should I help? With the chickens?" "They're dead. Nothing to help. Go back to bed." But she couldn't. She stood there until he'd gone to the barn, came back with a shovel, and buried the coyote. Watched him check the coop one more time, secure it, and finally head back toward the house. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked up at her. "You did good, not panicking." "I was panicking." "But you didn't run around screaming about it. That's what counts." He moved past her into the house. "Get some sleep. Dawn comes early." She went back to her room but didn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, to the wind outside, to the vast empty silence of the prairie. And she thought about the fact that Caleb Rourke hadn't asked her a single question about her past, hadn't pressed when she'd said she had no people back east, hadn't even asked why a woman would answer an advertisement for ranch work. Either he didn't care, or he understood that some questions were better left alone. She suspected it was the latter. Dawn came exactly as early as promised. Evelyn woke to the sound of Caleb moving around in the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filling the house. She dressed quickly, a simple work dress she'd bought specifically for this, still too nice, still too clean, and joined him. He handed her a cup of coffee without a word and nodded toward the table where he'd laid out 2 plates of eggs and more cornbread. "We start with the horses," he said between bites. "Feed, water, muck out the stalls, then the cattle. Then we fix that coop. After that depends on what breaks." "Something breaks every day. Something's always breaking. You just get faster at fixing it." She followed him to the barn after breakfast, trying to keep up with his long strides. Inside, 6 horses turned their heads to watch her. They were beautiful, sleek, powerful, better cared for than anything else on the property. "This is where you start," Caleb said, handing her a pitchfork. "Stalls need mucking. Throw the dirty straw in that wheelbarrow. Take it to the pile behind the barn. Fresh straw's in the loft. You'll need about this much per stall." He demonstrated, his movements efficient, practiced. "How often?" "Every day." "Of course, every day." She took the pitchfork and started on the first stall. The horse, a bay mare with kind eyes, shifted away from her, watching. "She won't hurt you," Caleb said from where he was hauling water. "None of them will unless you spook them. Move steady, talk quiet, let them know where you are." Evelyn had never been this close to a horse in her life. She'd certainly never cleaned up after one. The smell alone was overwhelming, thick and organic and unavoidable, but she set her jaw and started scraping soiled straw into the wheelbarrow. It was backbreaking work. Within 20 minutes, her shoulders burned. Within an hour, her hands were blistered despite the gloves Caleb had wordlessly handed her. The wheelbarrow was heavier than it looked, especially when fully loaded, and the trip to the manure pile felt longer each time. Caleb worked around her, moving through his own tasks with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. He didn't help her, didn't take over when she struggled, just let her figure it out. By the time she finished the last stall, she was shaking with exhaustion, and it wasn't even mid-morning. "Good," Caleb said, barely glancing at her work. "Now we water the cattle." The cattle were spread across a pasture that seemed to stretch forever. They had to haul water from the well to fill the troughs, bucket by bucket. Evelyn's arms screamed in protest. Her back throbbed. Her hands, even in gloves, were raw. But she didn't stop. Didn't complain. Just kept hauling water until Caleb finally said, "That's enough." They moved on to the chicken coop. 3 dead birds lay inside, torn apart. Caleb gathered them up without ceremony and tossed them aside for the carry-on birds. "We'll patch the weak spots," he said, examining the structure. "Wire here, reinforce this corner, add another latch." They worked through midday, the sun beating down mercilessly. Evelyn's dress was soaked through with sweat. Her hair, which she'd tried to pin up neatly that morning, hung in damp strands around her face. Caleb barely seemed to notice the heat. He worked steadily, methodically, showing her how to stretch wire, how to secure it properly, how to check for gaps a predator might exploit. "You always have to think like the thing trying to get in," he said. "Coyotes are smart. They'll test every weakness until they find one." "Sounds familiar," she muttered before she could stop herself. He glanced at her but didn't ask, just handed her the wire cutters and moved on to the next section. They ate a quick lunch of leftover cornbread and jerky, standing in the shade of the barn because sitting down seemed like something she might not recover from. Then it was back to work. Mending fence this time, which meant walking the perimeter of the nearest pasture and fixing any breaks or weak spots. The land went on forever. That was the thing that kept striking her. In Philadelphia, you were always hemmed in by buildings, by people, by the sheer density of civilization. Out here, there was nothing, just earth and sky and the unforgiving sun overhead. "You getting tired?" Caleb asked after they'd been walking for over an hour. No. A lie, and they both knew it. "We'll head back soon. Still got evening chores." Of course there were evening chores. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. Evelyn felt like she'd been wrung out and hung to dry. Every part of her ached. Her hands were a mess of blisters. Her face was burned despite the bonnet she'd worn. Her legs trembled with each step. "You cooked last night," Caleb said. "My turn. Clean up, rest a bit." She wanted to argue, to prove she could keep going, but she didn't have it in her. She nodded and made her way to the pump behind the house. The cold water was a shock and a relief. She scrubbed the day's grime from her hands and face, soaked her neck and arms, let the water run over her blistered palms until they went numb. When she came back inside, Caleb had beans and salt pork going on the stove. He'd changed his shirt, washed up himself. He looked tired but not destroyed, which was how she felt. "First day's always the hardest," he said, not looking up from the stove. "Does it get easier?" "You get stronger, work stays the same." They ate in silence again, but it felt different than the night before. Less awkward. More like two people too tired to waste energy on words. After supper, Evelyn washed the dishes while Caleb did a final check of the property. When he came back, she was sitting at the table, staring at her hands. "Let me see," he said. She held them out. The blisters had burst on a few fingers, leaving raw patches that stung. He disappeared into his room and came back with a tin of salve. "Give me your hand." She hesitated, then extended her right hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he applied the salve, careful around the worst spots. "Keep them clean," he said. "They'll toughen up." "Everything about me needs to toughen up, apparently." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You lasted the whole day. That's more than most would. Most people have better sense than to be here." "Probably." He finished with her left hand and closed the tin. "Why did you come here, Miss Hart?" There it was. The question she'd been expecting since she'd stepped off the train. She could lie. Spin something about adventure, or a fresh start, or wanting to see the West. But sitting in this dim kitchen, bone-tired and honest in a way she hadn't been in months, she found she didn't want to. "I needed to disappear," she said, and this seemed far enough. He nodded slowly. "Running from the law?" "No, just from everything else." "Everything else covers a lot of ground." "It does." He studied her for a long moment, then stood. "Well, you've disappeared. Question is whether you can stay disappeared, or if whatever you're running from is going to follow you." "It won't." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "Good." He picked up the tin of salve. "Keep this. Use it every night till your hands heal." He headed toward his room, then paused at the door. "Miss Hart?" "Yes?" "You did good today. Better than I expected." He said it matter-of-factly, then disappeared into his room, leaving her alone in the kitchen. Evelyn sat there for a while, turning the tin of salve over in her sore hands, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not happiness, exactly. Not peace. But maybe the smallest seed of possibility. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could become someone new. Maybe the past would stay where she'd left it. It was a nice thought. It lasted exactly 3 more days. The days fell into a rhythm that was brutal and somehow comforting in its predictability. Wake before dawn, Feed the horses, muck the stalls, haul water, mend whatever had broken overnight. Eat, work until your body screamed. Eat again, sleep like the dead. Repeat. Evelyn's hands did toughen up, just like Caleb said they would. The blisters hardened into calluses, the raw patches healed over. Her shoulders stopped burning quite so badly when she lifted the water buckets. Her back learned to accommodate the constant bending and hauling. She was becoming something different, something harder, and she couldn't decide if that scared her or relieved her. Caleb remained largely silent, speaking only when necessary. Instructions. Observations about the weather or the livestock. The occasional dry comment that might have been humor if delivered by someone else. He didn't pry, didn't ask about her past, didn't seem particularly interested in who she'd been before she'd stepped off that train. But he watched. She felt it when she worked, that steady assessment. Not leering, not suspicious exactly, just watchful. Like he was waiting to see what she'd do when things got hard, waiting for her to break or run or prove herself a fool for coming here. She was determined not to give him the satisfaction. On the fourth morning, she woke to find frost on the ground and her breath visible in the air. The temperature had dropped overnight, hard and sudden, the way it did out here where nothing stood between you and the weather. Caleb was already in the kitchen, building up the fire in the stove. "Going to need more firewood today," he said when she appeared. "Storm's coming, big one, from the look of it." She peered out the window. The sky was still dark, but even in the dim pre-dawn light she could see clouds massing on the horizon, thick and mean-looking. "How long do we have?" "Day, maybe. Maybe less." He poured coffee and handed her a cup. "We'll push through the regular work fast, then focus on prep. Secure anything that can blow away, bring the horses into the barn, make sure we've got enough wood and water inside to last a few days if we need it." "A few days?" "If it's bad enough." He said it like this was routine, just another thing the land threw at you that you had to absorb and survive. They worked faster that morning, but Caleb didn't cut corners. The horses still got fed properly, the stalls still got mucked, the cattle still got checked. But there was an urgency to it, an efficiency that hadn't been there before. After breakfast, eaten standing up quickly, Caleb handed her an axe. "You know how to split wood?" "No." "I'll show you. Watch." He set up a log on the chopping block, hefted his own axe with the ease of long practice, and brought it down in one clean motion. The log split perfectly, falling in two neat pieces. "Your turn." Evelyn positioned a log the way he had, gripped the axe, and swung. The blade bit into the wood but didn't split it, just stuck there, stubborn. "You're using your arms," Caleb said. "Use your whole body. Let the weight of the axe do the work." She tried again, better, but the log still didn't split. Again. She lost count of how many times she swung that axe. Her shoulders screamed, her hands, still tender despite the calluses, throbbed. But slowly, grudgingly, she started to get it. The rhythm. The way to let momentum and gravity do most of the work instead of forcing it with muscle she didn't have. When she finally split a log cleanly on her own, Caleb nodded. "Good. Keep going. We need enough to last through the storm and then some." He left her to it and disappeared into the barn. Evelyn kept swinging, kept splitting, building up a pile of firewood that grew with painful slowness. Every successful split felt like a small victory. Every missed swing felt like her body telling her to quit. She didn't quit. By midday, the wind had picked up. Not howling yet, but steady, cold, carrying the smell of rain or snow. She couldn't tell which. Caleb emerged from the barn leading all 6 horses. "Help me get them settled," he said. She followed him inside where he'd prepared the stalls with extra bedding, filled the water troughs, put out hay. The horses seemed to sense the coming storm, shifting restlessly, ears flicking. "They know," Caleb said, running a hand down the bay mare's neck. "Animals always know before we do." They worked together to get each horse secured, and Evelyn found herself talking to them the way Caleb did, quiet, steady, reassuring. The mare seemed to relax under her touch, and something about that felt important, like earning trust from something that had no reason to give it. "Not bad," Caleb said, watching her stroke the mare's nose. "She likes you." "How can you tell?" "She'd let you know if she didn't. Horses are honest that way." They spent the afternoon securing everything that could become a missile in high wind, Tools went into the barn. Loose boards got nailed down. The chickens, what was left of them, got moved into a reinforced section of the barn. Evelyn hauled water until her arms felt like they might fall off, filling every container in the house. The sky darkened early, clouds rolling in like a bruise spreading across the horizon. The temperature kept dropping. "It's going to snow," Caleb said, studying the sky. "Hard. In early fall. You're not east anymore. Weather does what it wants out here." They ate an early supper, stew Caleb had made that morning, thick and hot, and he built up the fire until it roared. "Stay inside once it starts," he said. "Don't go out for anything unless the house is on fire, and even then, think twice." "What about you?" "I'll need to check the barn. Make sure nothing collapses. Keep the animals calm. But you stay here." "I can help. You'll die." He said it flatly, without dramatics. "You don't know the land yet, can't see 5 feet in a whiteout. You'll get turned around, lose the house, freeze before you find your way back. So you stay inside. Understand?" She wanted to argue, to prove she wasn't helpless, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about her pride. This was about survival. "I understand." The snow started just after dark. It began as light flakes, almost gentle, dusting the ground with white. Within an hour it was coming down in sheets, wind driving it sideways against the windows. The temperature plummeted. Even with the fire roaring, cold seeped through the walls. Evelyn sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket, watching Caleb prepare. He dressed in layers, wrapped a scarf around his face, pulled his hat down low, took a rope from a hook by the door. "What's that for?" "Guideline. One end ties to the porch, other end I take with me. Only way to make sure I find my way back." He opened the door, and the wind screamed in, bringing snow and cold that stole her breath. Then he was gone, swallowed by white, and the door slammed shut behind him. Evelyn fed the fire and waited. Time crawled. The wind howled like something alive, furious, battering the house. Snow piled against the windows. The whole structure groaned and creaked under the assault. She kept checking the door, resisting the urge to open it and look for him. He'd said to stay inside. He'd been clear. But what if something had gone wrong? What if he was out there, hurt, lost despite his rope? The door burst open and Caleb stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow, ice crusted on his scarf. He shoved the door closed behind him and stood there, breathing hard. "Barn's secure," he said through the scarf. "Horses are spooked but safe. I'll need to check again in a few hours." "A few hours? Caleb, you can barely—" "I'll need to check again," he repeated, unwinding the scarf. His face was red, wind-burned, but his eyes were steady. "This is how it works. You do what needs doing, or you lose everything." He stripped off the wet outer layers and moved to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. Evelyn heated water for coffee, her own hands shaking slightly. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be hours, could be days." We waited out. She handed him the coffee and sat across from him. The wind rattled the windows. The fire crackled. The house felt very small suddenly, very fragile against the enormity of the storm outside. "You've done this before," she said. Not a question. "Every winter, some worse than others." He sipped the coffee, steam rising. "Lost the barn roof one year. Spent 3 days in here with 4 horses and a cow. That was memorable." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "I bet." They sat in silence, drinking coffee, listening to the storm rage. After a while, Caleb stood and checked the fire, added more wood, adjusted the damper. "You should sleep," he said. "Nothing to do but wait, and you'll want rest." "What about you?" "I'll sleep when I can. Need to check the barn again soon." But he sat back down, and they stayed there together, 2 people waiting out nature's fury with nothing but walls and fire between them and the killing cold. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. The wind reached a pitch that sounded like screaming, and the snow was so thick that when Evelyn peered out the window, she couldn't see the barn at all, just white, endless and disorienting. Caleb made his second trip to the barn around midnight. Evelyn tried not to watch the clock, tried not to think about how long he'd been gone, tried not to imagine him out there, rope or not, swallowed by the storm. When he came back, moving slower this time, she had hot coffee waiting. One of the horses kicked through a stall board, he said, accepting the cup. Panicked. I patched it, but it'll need proper fixing when this clears. Are they all right? Scared. Can't blame them. He looked exhausted. His hands trembled slightly as he drank the coffee. Whether from cold or fatigue, she couldn't tell. Caleb, you need to rest. Can't. Have to check again in a few hours. Then sleep now. I'll wake you. He studied her, weighing whether to trust her with this. Finally, he nodded and moved to the chair nearest the fire. He was asleep within minutes, still half-dressed for the cold, ready to go back out when needed. Evelyn kept the fire going and watched the clock. 3 hours, she decided. She'd give him 3 hours. She woke him at dawn, though there was barely any light to mark it. The storm still raged. Time, she said softly. He was awake instantly, on his feet, reaching for his outer layers. No complaints, no hesitation, just moving. Caleb, he paused. Be careful. Something crossed his face, too quick to read. Then he nodded and went back out into the white. The pattern repeated. Check the barn. Come back. Warm up. Sleep for a few hours. Go again. Evelyn kept the fire fed, the coffee hot, the house as warm as she could manage. She felt useless, trapped inside while he fought to keep everything from falling apart. But she understood now why he'd insisted she stay in. The few glimpses she got of the storm when he opened the door were terrifying. White chaos, screaming wind, cold that could kill in minutes. On the second day, the wind finally started to ease. The snow kept falling, but without the driving fury behind it. Caleb's trips to the barn got shorter, less desperate. Worst is past, he said during one return. Another day and it'll clear. The animals? Hungry, scared, alive. He looked like hell. 3 days of minimal sleep, constant exposure to brutal cold, running on coffee and stubbornness. But there was satisfaction in his eyes, too. They'd made it through. When the storm finally broke on the third day, the world outside was transformed. Snow piled as high as the porch railing in drifts. The barn was half buried. Everything was white and still and silent. Caleb opened the door and stood there, looking out. Come on, he said. Let's assess the damage. Evelyn followed him outside, and the cold hit her like a wall. But the sky was clearing, pale blue showing through breaking clouds. The sun was trying to come out. They waded through snow to the barn. Inside, the horses nickered at their approach, clearly relieved to see them. Caleb moved down the line, checking each one, running practiced hands over legs and bodies, looking for injuries or signs of distress. They're all right, he said, and Evelyn heard the relief in his voice. Shaken up, but all right. They spent the rest of the day digging out, clearing paths, checking structures, making sure nothing critical had been damaged. The work was hard but different from before. Shared. They moved around each other with increasing ease, anticipating what needed doing next without discussion. That evening, exhausted but victorious, they sat at the table with whiskey Caleb produced from somewhere. To surviving, he said, raising his glass. To surviving, Evelyn echoed. The whiskey burned going down, harsh and real. She coughed, and he almost smiled. Not much of a drinker? Not much opportunity lately. Well, you earned this one. He poured them each another finger. You did good during the storm. Kept your head, didn't panic, held the house together. I didn't do anything. You were the one out there. You kept the fire going, had coffee ready, didn't fall apart when I was gone. He met her eyes. That's not nothing. Out here, that's everything. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but the beginning of respect. The acknowledgement that they'd weathered something together and come through it. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said, emboldened by whiskey and exhaustion. You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Why did you place that advertisement? For help? He was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass slowly. Place is too much for one person, he said finally. I've been running it alone for 3 years since my brother left. Thought about selling, but this land's been in my family for 2 generations. Seemed wrong to let it go just because the work's hard. He paused. Tried hiring local, but nobody wants ranch work. Too hard, pays too little, too isolated. Figured someone from back east might be desperate enough to try. Desperate, Evelyn repeated. That's an accurate assessment. You going to tell me what you were desperate to get away from? The question hung there. She could deflect, change the subject, keep her walls up. But sitting in this dim kitchen after 3 days of surviving together, the walls felt heavier than the truth. A man destroyed my reputation, she said quietly. Made it impossible to stay. Made sure everyone believed I was something I wasn't. What did he say you were? A liar, a cheat, someone who couldn't be trusted. She stared into her whiskey. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that he was believed and I wasn't, so I left. He have a reason to lie about you? I refused him. He didn't take it well. Caleb nodded slowly. And now he's 3,000 miles away. That's the idea. But you think he might follow? No, he got what he wanted. Me gone, discredited, ruined. Why would he bother following? Caleb didn't answer, just watched her with those steady eyes. The letter arrived on Saturday when they made the weekly trip to town. They'd driven in through melting snow, the wagon struggling through mud and slush. Cutter's Pass looked even more desolate after the storm. Half the building still drifted in. The general store was open, though, and a few people were out, digging themselves free. Caleb tied off the wagon and headed inside to get supplies. Evelyn followed, drawing stares from the few locals present. A woman appeared at the counter, Mrs. Chen, the proprietor, Chinese, shrewd-eyed, missing nothing. This your new help? She asked Caleb. This is Miss Hart. Miss Hart. Mrs. Chen. Ma'am, Evelyn said. Mrs. Chen looked her over with undisguised assessment. You last through the storm? I did. Most don't. Most take one look at real winter out here and run back east. She turned to Caleb. Got a letter for you. Came on the train before the storm hit. She handed him an envelope. He glanced at it, frowned slightly, and tucked it in his coat. They loaded supplies, flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, and Evelyn tried not to notice the looks from the other people in the store. Curious. Speculative. A woman alone with Caleb Rourke living out on that ranch, what exactly was going on there? She kept her expression neutral and helped carry supplies to the wagon. On the drive back, Caleb was quieter than usual. The letter sat in his coat pocket like a weight. Bad news? She finally asked. Don't know yet. Back at the ranch, after they'd unloaded and stored everything, he finally opened it. Evelyn was in the kitchen starting supper when she heard him swear, sharp, vicious, entirely out of character. She went to the doorway. He was standing by the window, letter in hand, jaw tight. What is it? My brother. He crumpled the letter. He's coming back. I thought you said he left. He did. 3 years ago. Took his half of the inheritance money and went to San Francisco. Said he was done with ranching, done with this place, done with... He stopped himself. Now he says he's coming back. Wants to discuss the future of the ranch. What does that mean? It means he probably lost all his money and wants mine. Caleb threw the letter on the table. It means trouble. Over the next week, Evelyn learned more about Caleb Rourke through his silences than his words. He worked harder, longer, like he was trying to exhaust himself. Spoke less, grew more tense as the date of his brother's arrival approached. What's his name? She asked one evening. James. Are you two... close? Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, never were. My father split the ranch between us, but James never wanted it. Wanted city life, wanted excitement. We fought about it for 2 years after Pa died, then he finally took his share of the money and left. But he still owns half. Half the land, yeah. Can't sell it without both of us agreeing, which is probably why he's coming back. Wants me to buy him out, or wants to force a sale. And you don't want to sell. This land's all I've got, all I know how to do. He stared out at the darkening prairie. I'm not leaving. James Rourke arrived on a Tuesday, stepping off the same train Evelyn had arrived on 6 weeks earlier, but where she'd been alone and uncertain. James arrived with luggage, attitude, and the look of someone who'd seen better days and was bitter about it. Caleb had driven into town alone to meet him. They returned to the ranch in strained silence, James looking around at the place with poorly concealed disdain. He was younger than Caleb, maybe late 20s, with the same build but none of the weathering, soft hands, city clothes that looked out of place against the rough prairie, and eyes that took in everything with a calculating edge that made Evelyn's skin prickle. "So you're the help," he said when Caleb introduced them. Not unkind exactly, but dismissive, like she was furniture. "Miss Hart has been working here for 6 weeks," Caleb said evenly. "She's earned her place." "I'm sure she has," James smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Must get lonely out here, big brother. I don't blame you for wanting company." "It's not like that." "Of course not." James turned away, already losing interest. "I'll take my old room. We can talk business tomorrow." That night, the atmosphere in the house was toxic. James dominated the supper conversation with stories from San Francisco, parties, investments, opportunities, all delivered with the subtext that ranch life was beneath him and always had been. Evelyn stayed quiet, watching the brothers. Caleb ate in silence, responding only when directly addressed, his whole body tense. "You've let the place go," James said, pushing food around his plate. "Barn's leaning worse than I remember. Fences are a mess. How much stock you running?" "Enough to keep going." "That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting." James set down his fork. "I came here to have a conversation, Caleb, an adult conversation about what we're going to do with this place." "We're not doing anything. I'm keeping it running. You left, remember?" "I still own half. I still have a say." "Then say it." James glanced at Evelyn. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "Miss Hart lives here, works here. She can hear whatever you've got to say." Something ugly crossed James's face, but he smoothed it away. "Fine. I want to sell. The whole property. There's a cattle company out of Denver making offers on land in this area. Good offers. We could both walk away with enough to start over somewhere better." "I don't want somewhere better. I want here." "Why?" "What's here, Caleb? Backbreaking work? Isolation? Storms that nearly kill you every winter?" James leaned forward. "There's nothing for us here. There never was. Pa was a fool for thinking we could make something of this place, and you're a fool for trying to prove him right." Caleb stood so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. "Get out. This is my house too. Get out of this room before I throw you out." James stood slowly, hands up in mock surrender. "Fine. We'll discuss this when you're calmer. But Caleb?" He paused at the doorway. "I'm selling my half, with or without you. So you either buy me out or we force a sale, but either way, I'm done with this place." He left. Caleb stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Evelyn started clearing plates, trying to give him space, but he spoke suddenly, voice rough. "I can't buy him out. Don't have that kind of money. If he forces a sale," he didn't finish. "Then you fight it." "How? He owns half. Legally, he can force it. There has to be a way." He looked at her, and she saw something break in his expression. Not defeat exactly, but exhaustion. The weight of holding on to something that kept trying to slip away. "Maybe there isn't," he said quietly. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just being stubborn, holding on to something that's already gone." "You're not." She said it with more force than she'd intended. "This place, it's rough, it's hard, but it's real. It's worth fighting for." "Why do you care?" The question stopped her. Why did she care? 6 weeks ago, she'd been a stranger here, desperate and running. This wasn't her fight, except it was starting to feel like maybe it was. "Because you gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go," she said. "Because this place, it's not pretty, but it's honest. And I'm tired of places that look good but rot from the inside." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp. "All right then, we'll find a way." But over the next few days, James made it clear he wasn't going to make it easy. He nitpicked everything: the condition of the property, Caleb's management, the lack of profit. He made snide comments about Evelyn's presence. He spent his evenings in town, drinking, making friends with the same cattle company representatives he wanted to sell to. And then, 1 week after his arrival, he brought someone else home. Evelyn was in the barn when they arrived. She heard voices, looked out, and felt her entire body go cold. Victor Hale stepped out of the wagon behind James, smiling like he owned the world. She must have made a sound because Caleb appeared beside her. "What is it?" "That man," she whispered. "The one with your brother. That's Victor Hale." Caleb's expression hardened. The one who ruined you. Yes. They watched as James and Victor walked toward the house, laughing about something, easy together in a way that made her stomach turn. This isn't coincidence, Caleb said. My brother brought him here on purpose. But why? How would James even… She stopped. He knows. About me. About why I left. Looks that way. Victor's eyes scanned the property and landed on the barn. Even from a distance, Evelyn saw the moment he spotted her. Saw recognition flash across his face, then something worse. Triumph. Miss Hart, he called out, pleasant, poisonous. What a remarkable coincidence. I had no idea you'd landed here of all places. Caleb stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Evelyn and the two men approaching. I don't know who you are, he said evenly, but this is private property. You weren't invited. My apologies. Victor extended a hand that Caleb didn't take. Victor Hale. I'm an associate of James's. He mentioned he was visiting his brother's ranch, and I happened to be traveling through the area. I asked if I might join him for a day or two. His eyes slid to Evelyn. I certainly didn't expect to find an old acquaintance here. We're not acquaintances, Evelyn said, forcing her voice steady. No? I suppose that's fair. We were never formally introduced, were we? Though you certainly made an impression in Philadelphia. The whole city was talking about you. That's enough, Caleb said. I'm merely making conversation. I said that's enough. Caleb's voice was flat, dangerous. You're not welcome here, Hale. Get back in that wagon and leave. James stepped forward. Now hold on, Caleb. Victor's my guest. This is my ranch. I decide who's welcome. He's not. The brothers faced off, tension crackling between them. Victor watched with undisguised interest, like this was a show put on for his entertainment. Finally, James smiled coldly. It's half my ranch, brother, and I say he stays. The silence stretched thin and brittle as glass. Evelyn felt her breath catch in her chest, watching the two brothers locked in a standoff that had nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with power. Victor stood slightly behind James, arms crossed, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The same expression he'd worn when he'd destroyed her life back east. Then he can sleep in the barn, Caleb said finally, each word deliberate. But he doesn't come in my house, and he stays away from Miss Hart. Your house? James laughed, sharp and bitter. You keep saying that like you own the whole thing, like I don't have equal claim to every inch of this property. You gave up your claim when you left. That's not how inheritance works, and you know it. James turned to Victor. Come on, let's get you settled in the barn since my brother's forgotten his manners. They started toward the barn, and Caleb moved to block them, but Evelyn touched his arm. Don't, she said quietly. It's not worth it. He shouldn't be here. I know, but fighting with your brother right now gives them exactly what they want. Caleb's jaw worked, muscles tight, but he stepped aside. James and Victor walked past them into the barn, Victor's eyes sliding over Evelyn with an assessment that made her skin crawl. Still running, I see, Victor said conversationally. Though I have to admit, this is quite a distance you've managed. I'm impressed. Keep walking, Caleb said. Victor held up his hands in mock surrender and followed James deeper into the barn. Caleb waited until they were out of earshot, then turned to Evelyn. Tell me everything about him, about what he did. So she did. Standing in the barn with the horses shifting in their stalls around them, she told him about Victor Hale, about how he'd courted her after her father died, how she'd refused him because something in his eyes had always felt wrong, predatory, about how he'd retaliated by spreading rumors, that she'd stolen from her father's business partners, that she'd accepted gifts from men and then rejected them to create scandal, that she was unstable, untrustworthy, dangerous to know. None of it was true, she said, but it didn't matter. He was wealthy, connected, believed. I was a woman alone with no family to defend me. Within 2 months, I couldn't walk down the street without whispers following me. Couldn't find work. Couldn't stay. Why? Caleb asked. Why go to such lengths just because you refused him? Because men like Victor don't accept refusal. They see it as an insult that requires punishment. She wrapped her arms around herself. And because he could. Because he knew he'd be believed and I wouldn't. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring toward the barn entrance where James and Victor had disappeared. "He's here for a reason," he said finally. "My brother didn't bring him by accident. They're planning something." "I know. You should go. Tonight. Take the wagon into town. Catch the train." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. "I'm not running anymore." "Evelyn? I ran 3,000 miles. I'm done running." She met his eyes. "Whatever they're planning, whatever Victor thinks he's going to do, I'm not giving him the satisfaction of watching me flee again." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition of something he understood himself. The refusal to be pushed off land you'd claimed, even when staying meant fighting. "All right," he said. "Then we stand. Together." That night, dinner was poisonous. James had invited Victor to eat with them despite Caleb's earlier prohibition, and the meal devolved into a silent battle of wills. Victor played the gracious guest, complimenting the food, making pleasant observations about the territory, acting like his presence wasn't a deliberate provocation. "Miss Hart," he said, cutting his meat with precise movements, "you've adapted remarkably well to frontier life. When I knew you in Philadelphia, I wouldn't have imagined you capable of such rustic labor." "You didn't know me in Philadelphia," Evelyn said evenly. "You knew the person you invented in your stories." "Did I? I seem to recall quite a bit of factual information in those stories. Your father's debts, for instance, the creditors circling, the rather desperate circumstances you found yourself in after his death." Caleb's fork hit his plate with a clatter. "That's enough. I'm simply making conversation. You're baiting her, and it stops now." Victor leaned back, smiling. "My apologies. I didn't realize the topic was sensitive. Though I must say, James, your brother seems quite protective of his employee. One might even call it inappropriate." "One might shut their mouth before they lose teeth," Caleb said flatly. James intervened before it could escalate further. "Victor, perhaps we should discuss the cattle contracts we looked at in town. Caleb might be interested in the figures." "I doubt it," Caleb said, "since I'm not selling." "You keep saying that, but you might not have a choice." James pulled a document from his coat. "I spoke with a lawyer in town. Apparently, if one co-owner wants to sell and the other refuses, the court can force a partition sale. The property gets auctioned, proceeds split between us." "You son of a—" "Careful, brother. We're at the dinner table." Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "I'm done eating. Miss Hart, when you're finished, lock your door tonight." He walked out, letting the door slam behind him. In the silence that followed, Victor chuckled softly. "He always this temperamental?" "Only when dealing with people who deserve it," Evelyn said, standing. She gathered her plate and Caleb's, moving to the kitchen with deliberate calm even though her hands wanted to shake. Behind her, she heard James and Victor talking in low voices, the occasional word drifting through: lawyer, timeline, Denver, price, planning, calculating. She scrubbed the dishes harder than necessary, trying to focus on the physical task instead of the fear creeping up her spine. Victor Hale was here, in the same house. And whatever game he was playing, it involved more than just tormenting her. He and James were working together, and that meant Caleb's ranch was as much at risk as her own fragile new life. She finished the dishes and went to her room, locking the door as Caleb had instructed. Through the thin walls, she could hear James and Victor still talking, their voices a low murmur punctuated by occasional laughter, the sound of men confident in their power, certain of their victory. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every sound jerked her awake. Wind against the house, boards settling, footsteps in the hallway that might have been James or might have been her imagination. When dawn finally broke, she was exhausted and wired, her nerves scraped raw. Caleb was already in the barn when she arrived for morning chores. He looked like he hadn't slept either, lines deep around his eyes, jaw tight. "They left early," he said without preamble. "Took the wagon into town, said they'd be back this afternoon." "Planning something?" "Yeah." He handed her a pitchfork. "We work fast today, get the essentials done, then I need to ride out to the far pasture. Check the herd count, make sure everything's accounted for before James can claim I've been mismanaging the stock." They worked in tense silence, moving through the morning tasks with mechanical efficiency. Evelyn's mind wouldn't stop spinning, trying to think of ways out, solutions, anything that might shift the odds in their favor. But every angle led back to the same problem. James owned half the ranch legally, and if he wanted to force a sale, Caleb couldn't stop him, not without money to buy him out, which he didn't have. Around mid-morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not James and Victor returning, someone else. A woman on a sturdy paint horse, riding like she'd been born in the saddle. She pulled up near the barn and dismounted in one smooth motion. Tall, maybe 40, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She wore men's work clothes and carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested she could handle whatever came her way. Caleb Rourke? That's me? Sarah Brennan. I own the ranch north of here, about 8 miles up the river. She glanced at Evelyn, assessing, then back to Caleb. Heard your brother's back in town. Heard he's talking about selling this place to Denver Cattle Company. News travels fast. It does when it affects my water rights. Denver Cattle comes in here, first thing they'll do is dam up that river, divert it for their operation, my land dries up, my stock dies, and I'm done. She crossed her arms. So I have a vested interest in making sure that doesn't happen. Caleb studied her. You offering to help? I'm offering information. Denver Cattle's done this before in Wyoming. Buy up land, consolidate, push out the small operators. They play dirty, intimidation, legal pressure, sometimes worse. If your brother's working with them, you need to know what you're up against. I appreciate the warning. It's not just a warning. I'm saying if you fight this, you won't be fighting alone. There are 6 other ranchers in this area who'll go under if Denver takes control of the water. We've all got a stake in keeping them out. Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Not quite hope, but the possibility of it. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you don't roll over. I'm suggesting that if it comes to a legal fight, you'll have witnesses willing to testify about your management of this place, your improvements to the property, your investment of time and money. Courts don't always side with absentee owners trying to force a sale, especially when there's proof the working partner's been carrying the load. She glanced around the property. Place looks well maintained to me. Barn's solid, fences are good, stock looks healthy. That'll count for something. My brother's already talking to lawyers. Then you better talk to one too. There's a man in Laramie, Thomas Walsh. He specializes in property disputes, and he's not afraid of corporations. I can give you his information. Caleb nodded slowly. I'd appreciate that. Sarah pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and handed it over. Good luck, Rourke. You're going to need it. She mounted her horse, then paused. And whoever your help is, she nodded at Evelyn, she's part of your defense. Denver will try to claim you can't manage alone. Having a working employee proves otherwise. Keep good records of her wages, hours worked, everything. Make it official. She rode off, leaving them standing in a cloud of dust. Well, Evelyn said after a moment, that was unexpected. Sarah Brennan doesn't do anything without calculating the angles first. If she's offering help, it's because losing this ranch costs her too. He looked down at the paper in his hand. But she's right about one thing. I need a lawyer. Can you afford one? His silence was answer enough. That afternoon, James and Victor returned with supplies and another man, a slick-looking type in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as Lawrence Pike, representative of Denver Cattle Company. Mr. Rourke, Pike said, extending a hand that Caleb ignored. I wanted to meet you personally. Your brother has been telling me about this property, and I must say Denver Cattle is very interested in acquiring it. Not interested in selling. I understand the emotional attachment to family land, I do, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. Denver Cattle is prepared to make a very generous offer, enough for both you and your brother to walk away comfortable, start fresh somewhere with better prospects. I have prospects here. Pike glanced around pointedly. Do you? From what I understand, you're barely breaking even. One bad winter, one disease outbreak, and you're finished. Denver Cattle offers security, guaranteed income, a future. My future's here. Is it? Pike pulled out a document. This is our initial offer. Look it over. I think you'll find it quite compelling. Caleb didn't even glance at the paper. I think you'll find your way off my property compelling. You're not welcome here. Pike's pleasant expression didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. I understand you're upset, but you should know that Denver Cattle acquires the properties we want, Mr. Rourke. One way or another, we'd prefer to do it amicably, with everyone walking away satisfied, but we will acquire this land. That a threat? It's a statement of fact. Pike tucked the document away. Think about our offer. We'll be in touch. He left with James and Victor trailing behind him, the three of them talking in low voices as they headed toward town. Caleb stood rigid, watching them go. He meant that, Evelyn said quietly, about acquiring the land no matter what. I know. What are we going to do? He turned to look at her, and she saw something new in his expression. Not defeat, not fear, but cold determination. We're going to fight, and we're going to win. The next few days felt like waiting for a storm to break. Caleb rode to Laramie to meet with the lawyer Sarah had recommended. He came back tight-lipped, but slightly less tense. Walsh thinks we have the case, he said. Not guaranteed, but possible. If we can prove I've been the sole operator, that I've made improvements with my own money, that James abandoned his interest when he left, it might be enough to block a forced sale. At minimum, it'll drag things out in court, make it expensive enough that Denver Cattle might lose interest. And if they don't lose interest, then we're in for a long fight. James, meanwhile, had moved back into the house full-time, bringing Victor with him despite Caleb's objections. The atmosphere was unbearable. 3 men and a woman crammed into a space meant for one, tension crackling with every interaction. Victor made a point of cornering Evelyn whenever he could. Nothing overtly threatening, just comments designed to unsettle her. Observations about how isolated the ranch was. How easy it would be for something to happen out here, far from witnesses. How fragile her new life seemed. You know, he said one evening when she was alone in the kitchen, it's remarkable how history repeats itself. Here you are again, dependent on the charity of men, vulnerable to the whims of circumstance. I wonder what would happen if people around here learned about your past, about the theft allegations, the scandal. You already destroyed my reputation once, Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. There's nothing left for you to take. Isn't there? You've built something here, haven't you? A new name, a fresh start. How long do you think that lasts once people know who you really are? They know exactly who I am, someone who works hard and doesn't run from people like you. Victor smiled. We'll see about that. She told Caleb about the conversation that night. He listened, expression darkening. He's escalating, testing to see if he can break you down. He was quiet for a moment. There's another option. If this gets too dangerous, if he pushes too far, I'm not leaving. Evelyn, we already had this conversation. I'm not running. Not from Victor, not from his threats, not from any of this. He studied her in the lamplight, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or recognition that they were both too stubborn to know when to quit. All right, he said finally. But you carry this. He pulled a small pistol from a drawer and set it on the table between them. You know how to shoot? No. I'll teach you tomorrow. And you keep that on you at all times when Victor's around. Understand? She picked up the pistol, feeling its weight. You really think he'd... I think men like him don't like losing, and I think we need to be prepared for him to do something desperate. The shooting lesson came at dawn. Caleb set up targets behind the barn, old cans on fence posts, and showed her how to hold the pistol, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull. The first shot went wide, the recoil surprising her. The second clipped the edge of a can. By the 10th, she was hitting them more often than not. Good, Caleb said. Now again, but faster. You won't have time to think if you actually need it. They practiced until her ears rang and her hands ached, until loading and firing became almost automatic, until she could hit a target at 20 feet without hesitating. That'll do, Caleb said finally. Remember, you only draw it if you mean to use it. And if you draw it, you use it. No hesitating, no warning shots. You protect yourself first, worry about consequences later. She nodded, tucking the pistol into her skirt pocket where it sat heavy and strange. That afternoon, everything came to a head. They were working on the far fence line when they saw smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. Not the normal smoke from the stove or fireplace. This was thick, black, rolling. The barn, Caleb said, already running. They raced back, Evelyn struggling to keep up. By the time they reached the property, flames were engulfing the hay stored in the barn loft. The horses inside were screaming, panicked, trapped. "Get them out!" Caleb shouted, running inside. Evelyn followed, the heat and smoke immediately choking. She could barely see, but she felt her way to the first stall, fumbled with the latch, pulled the panicked horse toward the door. It fought her, terrified of the flames, but she held on, dragging it out into the open air. Back inside. Another horse. Then another. The smoke was so thick now she couldn't breathe, couldn't see, could only feel her way along the stalls. Her lungs burned, her eyes streamed. She heard Caleb's voice through the roar of flames, calling out that he had the last two. Then a crack like thunder and part of the loft collapsed, sending burning hay down in a cascade of sparks. Something hit her shoulder, a burning ember, and she cried out, stumbling. Strong hands grabbed her and hauled her toward the door. Caleb, soot-covered, shoving her outside into clean air. They collapsed in the yard, coughing, gasping. All 6 horses were out, milling around in terrified confusion. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching for the sky. "How did this start?" Evelyn managed between coughs. "It didn't." Caleb's voice was raw. "Look," he pointed. Near the barn entrance, partially hidden by smoke, was a can of kerosene. And standing by the house, watching the barn burn with expressions that weren't nearly surprised enough, were James and Victor. Caleb was on his feet and moving before Evelyn could stop him. He crossed the distance to his brother in long, furious strides and grabbed James by the shirt, slamming him against the house wall. "Did you do this?" "Get your hands off me. Did you burn my barn?" "Our barn." "And no, I didn't do anything. Fire must have started naturally." "There's a kerosene can by the door. That happened naturally too?" Victor stepped forward, all false concern. "Perhaps one of you left it there. These things happen with careless workers." Caleb's fist caught him in the jaw, a solid crack that sent Victor staggering back. Before he could recover, Caleb was on him, another punch that dropped him to the ground. James pulled a pistol from his coat. "That's enough." Everything froze. Caleb stepped back slowly, hands visible, eyes never leaving the gun pointed at his chest. "You pull that trigger," he said, voice deadly calm, "and you better kill me, because if you don't, I will end you." Big talk from someone who just lost his barn. James kept the gun steady. "Maybe this is a sign, brother. A sign you should take Denver's offer and walk away before something worse happens." "You threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. Accidents happen on ranches. Animals get spooked, buildings catch fire, people get hurt, especially when they're stubborn about things that don't matter anymore." "This land matters." "To who? You. You're one man, Caleb. Alone except for some woman you picked up desperate from the east. You think you can hold this place against everything trying to take it? You think you're that strong?" "I think I'm strong enough to survive you." Victor climbed to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip, and the look he gave Caleb was pure venom. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled, almost pleasant. "You know, Mr. Rourke, assault is a serious crime. Witnesses saw you attack me unprovoked. A man could press charges for something like that. Have you arrested, tied up in legal trouble while your ranch falls apart further?" He straightened his coat. "Of course I'm willing to overlook it. This time. Consider it a professional courtesy. But next time you lay hands on me, I'll have you in jail so fast your head will spin." He turned to James. "I think we've made our position clear. Perhaps we should give him some time to think about Denver's offer. Time to consider whether his pride is worth losing everything." They walked away, leaving Caleb and Evelyn standing in the shadow of the burning barn. Neighbors came to help once they saw the smoke. Sarah Brennan arrived with 3 of her hands, along with 2 other nearby ranchers. They formed a bucket line from the well, trying to save what they could, but the barn was lost. By nightfall, all that remained was a smoking skeleton, still glowing in places, the smell of burned wood and hay thick in the air. The horses were corralled in the far pasture, still spooked. Everything else, tools, supplies, feed, gone. "I'm sorry," Sarah said as they surveyed the damage. "This is a bad blow." "It was deliberate," Caleb said. "My brother and his friend said it." "Can you prove it?" "Not in a way that would hold up in court. They're too smart for that. Then you rebuild, fast, before Denver can claim you're not maintaining the property. She looked at the other ranchers who'd stayed. We'll help. All of us. Can't let them win like this. Over the next week, the community came together in a way Evelyn hadn't expected. Men showed up at dawn with lumber and tools. Women brought food. Within days, the skeleton of a new barn was rising from the ashes of the old one. It wasn't as large, wasn't as finished, but it was functional. Enough to house the horses, protect the remaining supplies. Caleb worked like a man possessed, from dawn until long after dark, driving himself to exhaustion. Evelyn worked beside him, hauling lumber, holding boards in place, hammering until her hands blistered all over again. James and Victor stayed away during the rebuilding, but their presence hung over everything. Everyone knew what this was. A message. A demonstration that they could destroy what Caleb had built anytime they wanted. And if they could burn a barn, what else might they do? The answer came on a cold morning 2 weeks after the fire. Evelyn went to check on the horses and found the bay mare, the one who'd been so gentle with her, lying in the pasture. Dead. No visible wounds, no sign of struggle, just gone. She ran to get Caleb. He examined the mare carefully, then stood. Poisoned, he said flatly. Something in her feed, probably. Meant to look natural, but timed too perfectly to be coincidence. Why would they? But she knew why. Another message. Another reminder of how vulnerable everything they'd built really was. Caleb buried the mare himself, digging in frozen ground until his hands bled, refusing help. When he finally came back to the house that evening, he looked like something vital had been carved out of him. They're not going to stop, he said. Not until I give in, or there's nothing left to fight for. Evelyn poured him coffee, her own hands shaking. Then we make them stop. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out. She sat across from him. You said your lawyer thinks you have a case. How long before it goes to court? Months, probably. Walsh has to file motions, build evidence, get it on the docket, and that's assuming James doesn't find a judge willing to fast-track the partition sale. So we buy time. We make it expensive and difficult for them. And we find leverage. What leverage? Everyone has secrets, Caleb. James, Victor, Denver Cattle Company. We find theirs and we use them. He looked at her like he was seeing someone new. That's not exactly legal. Neither is burning barns and poisoning horses. We play by their rules or we lose everything. Something shifted in his expression. Acceptance, maybe, or just recognition that she was right. All right, he said. Then we fight dirty. The plan came together over the next 3 days in whispered conversations after dark, when James and Victor were in town drinking away their evenings. Evelyn had spent enough time around powerful men back east to understand how they operated. Secrets were currency, and everyone had something they needed hidden. Sarah Brennan proved more useful than either of them expected. She arrived on the 4th morning with a leather satchel and a grim expression. Got some interesting information about your Denver Cattle Company, she said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Friend of mine works in the land office in Cheyenne. Pulled some records for me. Caleb studied the documents. What am I looking at? Denver Cattle's been acquiring land all through Wyoming and Colorado. But here's the thing. Half these acquisitions have disputes attached. Former owners claiming they were forced out through intimidation, threatened, had their property mysteriously damaged until they sold cheap. She tapped one particular file. 3 separate cases where fires broke out right before the owners agreed to sell. Sound familiar? Can we use this in court? Walsh thinks so. Shows a pattern of behavior, makes it harder for them to claim your barn fire was accidental. Sarah pulled out another document. And this is even better. Denver Cattle's been routing water illegally on properties they control in Wyoming. Got citations from the territory, fines they haven't paid. A judge sees they're already operating outside the law, makes them less credible. Evelyn leaned over the table, scanning the papers. This is good, but it's not enough to stop them, is it? No, Sarah admitted. It'll slow them down, make things messier. But if James forces that partition sale, none of this might matter. Then we need something on James, Caleb said. Or Victor. Victor's the weak link, Evelyn said. Both of them turned to look at her. I know him. I know how he operates. He's arrogant, thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Men like that always make mistakes because they assume they won't get caught. What kind of mistakes? Sarah asked. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. That evening, when Victor returned from town with James, Evelyn was waiting in the kitchen. She'd changed into one of her old Eastern dresses, the kind she'd worn in Philadelphia, nicer, more refined. She'd pinned her hair up carefully. Victor noticed immediately. My, he said, stopping in the doorway. Don't you look civilized? Almost forgot what you looked like when you weren't covered in barn muck. I need to speak with you, she said, keeping her voice measured. Privately. His eyebrows raised. How intriguing. James, give us the room. James looked between them suspiciously, but left. Victor sat across from her, that familiar predatory smile playing at his lips. I'm listening. I want to make a deal. The words tasted like poison, but she forced them out. You want to hurt Caleb? Force this sale. Fine. But leave me out of it. Give me enough money to get to California, start over somewhere you'll never find me, and I'll disappear. I'll even testify that Caleb's been mismanaging the ranch if that helps your case. Victor studied her, fingers steepled under his chin. What brought this on? Conscience finally catching up with you? Reality catching up with me. I came here to escape you and you followed, so I'll go somewhere farther, somewhere even you can't reach. And what makes you think I'd let you go that easily? I went through considerable effort to track you down, Miss Hart. Her stomach went cold. What do you mean, track me down? Did you really think it was coincidence I ended up here? He laughed, genuinely amused. I've had people watching for your name since you left Philadelphia. The moment you answered that advertisement, I knew exactly where you'd gone. I came out here specifically to finish what I started. Why? Why do you care this much? His expression hardened. Because you humiliated me. You refused my proposal in front of witnesses, made me look like a fool. No woman does that to me and walks away unscathed. I destroyed your reputation in Philadelphia, but that wasn't enough. I wanted you to know that nowhere is far enough, that I can find you anywhere and ruin whatever pathetic life you try to build. There it was. Evelyn kept her face carefully neutral even as rage burned through her veins. So you teamed up with James. Pure luck, that. I came to find you, happened to mention it in a bar in Cutter's Pass. James overheard, realized we had mutual interests. He wants his brother's land, I want you broken. Denver Cattle wants the territory. Everyone wins. He leaned forward. Except you and poor Caleb, of course. You're going to destroy his ranch just to hurt me. I'm going to destroy his ranch because it's profitable and because he made the mistake of protecting you. Consider it a lesson in the cost of defying me. Evelyn stood slowly. Thank you for being honest. Where do you think you're going? To pack. You're right. Nowhere's far enough. I should have known that from the start. She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. She made it to her room, closed the door, and leaned against it, shaking. Caleb appeared in her doorway minutes later. Well? He admitted everything, tracking me, teaming up with James, planning to destroy the ranch. She met his eyes. And I got him to say it loud enough that Sarah heard every word through the window. Sarah emerged from the shadows outside, holding a small notebook. Got it all written down. Every word. His admission about tracking you across state lines could be stalking. His admission about conspiracy with James to force the sale through intimidation, that's illegal coercion. And the pattern with Denver Cattle we already documented. She smiled grimly. Walsh is going to have a field day with this. Will it hold up in court? Caleb asked. Your word against his unless we can get him to repeat it somewhere more official. Sarah tucked the notebook away. But it's leverage. Real leverage. Enough to make him think twice about pushing further. He won't stop, Evelyn said. You don't understand how he thinks. This will just make him more determined. Then we use it to negotiate, Caleb said. We tell him we have his confession, we have proof of Denver Cattle's illegal activity, and if he pushes this to court, we make all of it public. Destroy his reputation the way he destroyed yours. You think he'll care about reputation? Rich men always care about reputation. It's the only thing they value more than money. The confrontation came the next morning. Caleb called for a meeting in the kitchen, himself, Evelyn, James, and Victor. Sarah waited outside as witness in case things went badly. Victor looked relaxed, confident. James just looked impatient. "What's this about?" James demanded. "We've got business in town." "It's about your business partner here admitting to stalking Miss Hart across 3,000 miles, conspiring to commit arson, and working with Denver Cattle to illegally force a property sale." Caleb laid Sarah's notebook on the table. "All of which is documented, witnessed, and ready to be filed with the territorial marshal if you don't back off." Victor's smile never wavered, but something cold entered his eyes. "That's quite an accusation. You have any proof?" "Your own words. You told Miss Hart everything last night. She wasn't alone." "It would be my word against hers, and we both know whose word carries more weight." He glanced at James. "Your brother's getting desperate, making up stories, forging evidence. This is exactly the kind of mismanagement we've been talking about." "There's also the matter of Denver Cattle's operations in Wyoming," Caleb continued. "The illegal water routing, the suspicious fires at properties they later acquired, the citations they've been dodging, all documented by the Territorial Land Office. A judge sees that pattern alongside what happened to my barn, your credibility evaporates." James shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing you withdraw your petition for partition sale. You sign over your interest in the ranch to me for a fair price. Not Denver's inflated offer, but actual market value based on assessment. And you both get out of my territory and stay out." "And if we refuse?" Victor asked. "Then I file everything with the marshal and the territorial court. Your stalking of Miss Hart becomes a criminal matter. Denver Cattle's illegal operations get investigated. James gets tied up in conspiracy charges. And I make sure every newspaper from here to Philadelphia knows exactly what kind of man you are, Victor. How you destroyed a woman's reputation out of spite, tracked her across the country to finish ruining her life. I don't care how wealthy you are. That kind of story sticks." Victor's mask finally cracked. Fury twisted his features. "You're bluffing." "Try me." The silence stretched. James broke first. "Victor, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Victor stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake, Rourke. Both of you. You think you've won something here, but all you've done is make this personal. And when I make things personal, people lose everything." "Then I guess we're even," Evelyn said quietly. "Because you already took everything from me once. I've got nothing left to lose." "Everyone has something to lose." He leaned across the table toward her. "Maybe it's not your reputation this time. Maybe it's your life." Caleb was moving before the words fully registered, grabbing Victor by the throat and slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. "You just threatened her life in front of witnesses," Caleb said, voice deadly calm. "That's a crime. Say it again, and I'll have the marshal out here before sunset." James pulled his pistol again, but Sarah burst through the door, rifle leveled at him. "Put it down, James. This has gone far enough." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then James slowly lowered the gun. Caleb released Victor, who staggered back, gasping, hand at his throat. "Get out," Caleb said. "Both of you. Pack your things and get off my land. You've got 1 hour." "This isn't over," Victor rasped. "It is unless you want criminal charges filed before lunch. Your choice." They left. Victor first, storming out with murderous rage in his eyes. James followed more slowly, looking between his brother and the ranch with something that might have been regret. "You could have had all this," Caleb said to him, "if you'd stayed, if you'd worked instead of running. But you made your choice 3 years ago. Live with it." James opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it and walked out. Sarah lowered her rifle. "That went better than expected. Nobody got shot." "It's not over," Evelyn said. "Victor meant that threat. He's not going to just walk away." "Then we make sure the marshal knows about it," Sarah said. "I'll ride to town, file a report, make it official. He tries anything after this, he's got the law on him." She left, and Caleb and Evelyn stood in the sudden quiet of the empty house. "You should have let me leave," Evelyn said. "All of this, the barn, the horse, the threats, it's because of me. If I'd just gone when Victor first showed up, then you'd be running again, and he'd keep chasing." Caleb crossed to her. "This isn't your fault, it's his, and we're not giving him the satisfaction of winning." "What if he does something worse? What if next time it's not a barn or a horse? What if it won't be? Because we're ready now, and because you're not alone anymore." The words hit her harder than she expected. She'd been alone for so long, even in Philadelphia, surrounded by people. She'd been fundamentally alone. Her father gone, no family, friends who'd abandoned her the moment scandal touched her name. She'd come west expecting more of the same. Isolation, survival, nothing more. But standing in this kitchen with Caleb, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on both of them, she realized that had changed. Somewhere between mucking stalls and surviving storms and fighting off men who wanted to take everything, they'd become something more than employer and employee, more than strangers sharing space. Caleb. The sound of hoofbeats cut her off. They both tensed, reaching for weapons, but it was Sarah returning at a gallop, her horse lathered and wild-eyed. "River's rising," she shouted before she even dismounted. "Storm broke the snowpack up in the mountains, all that melts coming down at once. Flash flood. We've got maybe hours before it hits." Caleb swore viciously. "The herd's in the low pasture." "Then we move them. Now. I've got my hands coming, sent word to the other ranches, but it's going to be close." They were moving before she finished speaking. Caleb grabbed rope and his horse. Evelyn ran for the remaining horses in the new barn. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding hard for the eastern pasture where most of the cattle grazed. The sky had that strange yellow-gray color that meant bad weather, and even from a distance, Evelyn could hear the river, a roar that shouldn't have been there, growing louder. The cattle were already nervous, milling and lowing, sensing something wrong. Caleb positioned riders. Sarah's hands had arrived, along with men from 2 other ranches, and they started moving the herd north toward higher ground. It should have been straightforward, should have been routine, but the river had other ideas. The first surge hit while they were mid-drive, water exploding over the banks in a brown churning wall. Evelyn saw it coming and screamed a warning, but the sound was lost in the roar. The water slammed into the herd, scattering cattle, sweeping several away immediately. Her horse reared, terrified, and she barely kept her seat. Around her, chaos, riders shouting, cattle bawling, water rising so fast it was like the land was being swallowed. "Get to high ground," Caleb's voice, barely audible. "Leave the cattle, just get clear." But even as he shouted it, Evelyn saw him turn his horse back toward the water. 3 cattle were trapped in a depression, water rising around them, already up to their shoulders. If they went under, they'd drown in seconds. Caleb rode straight into the flood. "No!" Evelyn kicked her horse forward, but Sarah grabbed her reins. "You can't help him. Water's too strong." "I'm not leaving him." She jerked free and plunged her horse into the water after Caleb. The current hit like a fist, nearly unseating her, but she held on. Her horse struggled, fighting to keep its head above water, hooves slipping on submerged ground. Ahead, Caleb had reached the trapped cattle. He was in the water himself now, up to his chest, trying to cut them free from whatever had them tangled. The water kept rising. Evelyn pushed closer, her horse swimming now, more than walking. "Caleb!" He looked up, saw her, and fury crossed his face. "I told you to get clear, and I told you I'm not running." She reached him, grabbing his arm. "Come on, they're not worth your life. They're all I've got left." A surge of water hit them, and suddenly they were both under. Evelyn felt herself torn from the horse, tumbling in brown chaos. No up or down, just cold and pressure, and the certainty that she was going to drown. Then hands grabbed her, hauled her up. She broke the surface, gasping. Caleb's arm locked around her waist, pulling her towards something solid. A tree, half submerged but still rooted. They clung to it, the water raging around them, debris slamming past. One of the cattle they'd tried to save swept by, already dead. "We have to move," Caleb shouted over the roar. "Tree won't hold." "Which way?" "Downstream. Let the current take us, angle toward the north bank." It was insane. The water was moving so fast that anything it hit would be crushed. But staying meant drowning, so Evelyn nodded. They let go together. The flood took them, spinning, smashing them into debris and rocks. Evelyn's head went under, came up, went under again. She felt Caleb beside her, his hand locked on her wrist, refusing to let go even as the current tried to tear them apart. Her shoulder hit something hard, and pain exploded through her. She screamed, swallowed water, choked. Caleb was pulling her, dragging her toward the bank. She could see it now, closer than she'd thought, reachable if they could just... Her feet hit bottom. Solid ground. They half crawled, half dragged each other out of the water, collapsing on the muddy bank well above the floodline. For a long time, they just lay there, coughing up water, shaking with cold and shock. Around them, the flood continued to rage, swallowing everything in its path. "You could have died," Caleb finally said, his voice raw. "So could you. It's my land, my risk to take. It's our fight now." She rolled over to face him, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. "You don't get to die heroically and leave me alone out here. We survive together or not at all." He stared at her, water dripping from his hair, his face streaked with mud, and something in his expression broke open. Without thinking, without planning, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fierce, the kiss of two people who'd just cheated death and needed to confirm they were still alive. Evelyn kissed him back just as hard, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the flood still roaring behind them, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I can't lose this place," he said quietly. "It's all I have, all I know how to be." "You won't. We won't." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But Caleb, the land isn't all you have anymore." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "No, I suppose it's not." They stayed like that for a moment longer, then reality crashed back in. The flood, the herd, the ranch. They stumbled to their feet, bodies protesting, and looked around. They'd been swept nearly a mile downstream from where they'd started. In the distance, riders were visible on higher ground, Sarah and her hands, the other ranchers, looking for them. Caleb waved his arms, shouting. It took a few minutes, but finally someone spotted them. Within half an hour, they'd been retrieved, wrapped in blankets, and Sarah was reading them both the riot act for nearly drowning. "Stupidest thing I've ever seen," she said, but there was relief under the anger. "Both of you charging into a flash flood. You got a death wish?" "How bad is it?" Caleb asked, ignoring the question. "The damage?" Sarah's expression said everything. "Bad. Lost most of the herd in the low pasture, drowned or scattered. Fences are gone. Some of the outbuildings on my property went under, and the river's still rising. We won't know the full damage until it recedes." Caleb closed his eyes. "How many head?" 30, maybe 40. Could be worse when we get a full count." 40 head. At market prices, that was thousands of dollars. Money Caleb didn't have. Money that would have kept the ranch running through winter. "This will finish us," he said quietly. "Even without James forcing a sale, we can't recover from this." "Don't!" Evelyn said sharply. "Don't give up yet." "Give up? Look around. The herd's gone, the land's flooded. I'm in debt to the lawyer, and winter's coming. There's nothing left to fight with." "There's us." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "There's the people who helped rebuild the barn. There's Sarah and the other ranchers who will testify about Denver Cattle's illegal operations. There's the fact that we're still alive and still standing." "Barely. Barely counts." Sarah cleared her throat. "Hate to interrupt, but she's right. This flood hit everyone, not just you. We're all going to be rebuilding, and there's emergency territory funds for natural disasters. Applications get filed, some relief money gets distributed. It's not much, but it's something. How long does that take?" "Weeks, maybe months." Caleb laughed bitterly. "I don't have weeks. James's lawyer already filed the partition petition. Court dates in 3 weeks. I show up with a flooded ranch, dead cattle, and no way to prove I can maintain the property. The judge will side with him automatically. Then we make sure you show up with proof you're rebuilding, with witnesses who will testify you've been managing the property well, despite deliberate sabotage, with evidence that Denver Cattle's been operating illegally and James conspired with them." Sarah crossed her arms. "We fight, Caleb. That's what we do out here. We fight." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, the water finally starting to recede. The damage was everywhere. Fields turned to swamps, fences down, debris scattered across the property. The new barn had held, but the chicken coop was gone, swept away entirely. Inside the house, everything was as they'd left it, untouched by the flood through sheer luck of elevation. Evelyn built up the fire while Caleb changed into dry clothes, her shoulder throbbing where she'd hit that debris. When he came back out, he looked exhausted. Beaten in a way the barn fire hadn't accomplished, in a way Victor's threats hadn't managed, like he'd finally hit the wall of what one person could endure. "Let me see that shoulder," he said. She peeled back her wet shirt enough to reveal the bruise already forming, dark purple spreading across her skin. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Might be cracked. You need a doctor." "We can't afford a doctor." "Evelyn, I'm fine. It hurts, but I can move it. Not broken." She pulled the shirt back. "We have bigger problems." He sat heavily at the table, head in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this. Any of it. The flood, James, the court date. There's too many things breaking at once." She sat across from him, taking his hands in hers. They were rough, scarred from years of ranch work, and she held them like they were precious. "Then we fix them one at a time. Tomorrow, we assess the full damage. We file for the emergency funds. We contact Walsh, give him everything we've got on Victor and Denver cattle. We gather testimonies from Sarah and the others. We document every improvement you've made to this property." She squeezed his hands. "And we show that judge that you've been fighting to save this place against impossible odds, while James abandoned it and only came back to profit from your work. What if it's not enough? Then we'll know we tried everything. But Caleb—" She waited until he met her eyes. "I don't think it'll come to that, because we're not fighting alone anymore, and because you're too stubborn to let them win." He almost smiled. "Where'd you learn to be this stubborn?" "From you, and from having everything taken once already. It makes you mean." This time he did smile, just a little, just for a moment. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not drowning, for not running, for—" He gestured vaguely at everything, all of it. "You gave me a place to stand when I had nowhere else. This is me returning the favor." He kissed her again, gentler this time, and it felt like a promise. Like no matter what came next, court battles or floods or Victor's vengeance, they'd face it together. The knock on the door shattered the moment. They broke apart, both reaching for weapons. It was full dark outside now. No reason for visitors unless something was wrong. Caleb opened the door to find the marshal standing there looking grim. "Rourke, Miss Hart, I'm afraid I've got bad news." "What now?" "Victor Hale filed assault charges against you this afternoon. Claims you attacked him unprovoked, threatened his life. He's got James Rourke as a witness." The marshal looked genuinely sorry. "I've got a warrant for your arrest." Evelyn's hand went to the pistol in her pocket before she could think better of it. The marshal noticed, his own hand moving toward his sidearm. "Easy now, miss. Nobody needs to make this worse." "Marshal Coleman," Caleb said, voice carefully controlled. "Victor Hale threatened Miss Hart's life in front of witnesses this morning. Sarah Brennan heard everything, can testify to it. He's filing charges to retaliate. Not because I actually committed a crime." "That may be, but I've still got a warrant and I've still got to bring you in." Coleman looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I can give you tonight, let you get your affairs in order, make sure the animals are cared for. But come morning, you turn yourself in or I come back with deputies. Understood?" "How long will they hold him?" Evelyn asked. "Depends on the judge. Bail hearings probably 2-3 days out. If Hale pushes hard, could be longer." 2 or 3 days? The court date for the partition sale was in 3 weeks. If Victor could keep Caleb locked up, even for a week, it would be enough to prove he couldn't manage the ranch. Enough to sway the judge toward James's petition. "This is deliberate," she said. "Victor's trying to, I know what he's trying to do, miss, but the law's the law. Man files charges, I investigate." Coleman shifted his weight. "For what it's worth, I heard about the barn fire, about your mare, and I've been asking questions about this Denver cattle company. Don't much like what I'm hearing." "Then help us," Evelyn said. "I am helping. I'm giving you tonight instead of hauling Caleb in right now." He tipped his hat. "Make it count." He left, and the silence in his wake felt suffocating. Caleb stood perfectly still, staring at nothing, and Evelyn could see him calculating, trying to find an angle that didn't exist. "I should run," he said finally. "No. If I'm not here, they can't arrest me, can't hold me, can't use it against me in court. Well, if you run, you lose everything automatically. The ranch, the case, all of it. Victor wins." She moved in front of him, forcing him to look at her. We knew he'd do something like this. We planned for it. Did we? Because I don't remember the plan including me sitting in a jail cell while my ranch falls apart. The plan includes Walsh, includes Sarah's testimony, includes everything we've documented about Victor's stalking and Denver Cattle's illegal operations. She grabbed his arms. You turn yourself in tomorrow. Walsh gets you out on bail as fast as possible, and we use the arrest itself as proof of the harassment campaign against you. That's a lot of faith in a legal system that's already shown it favors men like Victor. It's the only play we have. He pulled away, pacing to the window. Outside, the flooded landscape stretched dark and ruined. Everything he'd worked for damaged or destroyed. And now they wanted to take his freedom too. I can't leave you alone here, he said. Not with Victor still around. Not with James. I'll be fine. You won't. He turned back to her. The second I'm in custody, Victor's going to come after you. And without me here, then I'll handle it. She pulled the pistol from her pocket, the weight of it familiar now after their practice sessions. You taught me how. Something complicated crossed his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition that she'd changed from the desperate woman who'd stepped off that train months ago. She'd learned to split wood in muck stalls and survive storms, learned to stand her ground when powerful men tried to push her aside, learned that running forever wasn't the same as being free. Evelyn, I love you, she said, the words coming out before she'd fully decided to speak them. I don't know when it happened or if it's even smart given everything that's falling apart, but I do. And I need you to know that before tomorrow, before whatever comes next. He crossed the room in 2 strides and kissed her hard enough that she tasted desperation in it. When they broke apart, his hands were shaking where they cupped her face. I love you too, he said roughly, which is why I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if they keep me locked up, if the judge rules for James, if Victor, promise me you'll leave, take whatever money's left and go, start over somewhere he can't find you. I'm not promising that. Evelyn, no. Because it's not going wrong. We're going to fight this and we're going to win, and then we're going to rebuild everything they tried to destroy. She pressed her forehead to his. Together. That's the only promise I'm making. They spent that night preparing. Caleb wrote out detailed instructions for the ranch, feeding schedules, repairs that needed doing, emergency contacts. Evelyn helped him gather documentation, receipts for improvements he'd made to the property, letters from suppliers proving his consistent management, Sarah's written testimony about the barn fire, and Victor's threats. Around midnight, Sarah arrived with 2 of her ranch hands. Heard about the warrant, she said without preamble. Figured you could use some help keeping watch tonight. My boys will take shifts, make sure nobody tries anything before morning. Sarah, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Because what's happening to you is wrong, and because if Denver Cattle takes your land, mine's next. She softened slightly. Besides, you helped me rebuild my fences last spring when half my herd broke through. Time to return the favor. They positioned the ranch hands, one watching the road, one near the barn. Sarah settled in the kitchen with coffee and her rifle. You should sleep, she told them. Both of you. Going to need your strength for what comes next. But neither of them could sleep. They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, holding each other like they could stop time through sheer force of will. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, Caleb kissed her one more time and stood. I'll be back, he said. However long it takes, I'll be back. I know. Marshal Coleman arrived at 8. He was professional about it. No dramatics, no unnecessary roughness. Just handcuffs and a quiet apology before leading Caleb to the wagon. Evelyn watched from the porch, her throat tight, refusing to let herself cry until they were out of sight. Sarah came to stand beside her. He'll be all right. Coleman's a decent man. He'll make sure Caleb's not mistreated. It's not Coleman I'm worried about. No, me neither. Sarah checked her rifle. I'm staying until he's back. My hands can manage my place for a few days. You shouldn't be alone out here. Victor's going to come, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. Probably. He thinks he's won. Men like that always need to gloat. Sarah smiled grimly. Let him come. I've been waiting for a good excuse to shoot someone. Victor arrived that afternoon with James and Lawrence Pike from Denver Cattle. 3 men, confident and arrogant, riding up to the ranch like they already owned it. Evelyn met them on the porch, pistol visible in her belt, Sarah standing beside her with the rifle. "Miss Hart," Victor said pleasantly, "I heard about poor Caleb's arrest. Such a shame. Assault charges are serious business. Fraudulent assault charges filed as retaliation for exposing your criminal activity. Yes, serious business." She kept her voice level. "What do you want, Victor?" "Just checking on the property. James here is understandably concerned about his investment, what with his brother in jail and a woman running things." He looked around pointedly. "Though from the look of the flood damage, there's not much left to run." "Get to the point." Pike stepped forward. "Denver Cattle is prepared to make a final offer. We'll buy out both brothers' shares, full market value, despite the damage. James has already agreed. We just need your employer to sign once he's released from custody." "And if he refuses?" "Then the court will force the sale when James's petition is granted, which it will be now that Caleb's demonstrated he can't even stay out of jail long enough to manage the property." Pike smiled. "Either way, Denver Cattle acquires this land. We're offering the easy path. The alternative is bankruptcy and legal fees that'll follow him for years." "You forgot one alternative," Sarah said. "The one where we expose Denver Cattle's illegal operations to the territorial governor. The water rights violations, the intimidation campaign, the pattern of suspicious fires. Funny how those investigations tend to freeze all land acquisitions pending resolution." Pike's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. "You'd be making powerful enemies, Mrs. Brennan." "Already have powerful enemies. Hasn't killed me yet." Victor laughed. "This is entertaining, but ultimately pointless. Caleb's finished. His ranch is finished. The smart move, Miss Hart, is to accept reality. Take the money Denver's offering, disappear like you should have months ago." "I'm done disappearing." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're one woman with a pistol she probably doesn't know how to use, defending a property that's already lost. That's not strength. That's delusion." Evelyn pulled the pistol smoothly, cocked it, and aimed at the ground 2 feet from Victor's horse. The shot cracked across the prairie, kicking up dirt, and the horse reared, nearly throwing him. When he got it under control, his face was purple with rage. "I know how to use it just fine," Evelyn said calmly. "And the next one goes through your knee if you're still on my property in 30 seconds. "Your property?" Victor spat. "You're hired help at best, a whore at worst." Sarah's rifle came up, pointed directly at his chest. 20 seconds. Pike held up his hands. "Gentlemen, ladies, let's all stay calm. There's no need for violence." 15 seconds, Evelyn said. They left. Victor turned in his saddle as they rode away, shouting back, "You're going to regret this, both of you. When Caleb's convicted and the ranch is seized and you've got nothing." His words were lost to distance. Sarah lowered her rifle and let out a breath. "Well, that felt good." "Is it true?" Evelyn asked quietly. "What Pike said, about the court forcing the sale even if we fight it." "Might be. Depends on the judge, the evidence, how good Walsh is at arguing. But Evelyn," Sarah turned to her, "even if we lose the ranch, you made Victor Hale look like a fool just now. You stood your ground and didn't break. That's worth something." "Maybe. But it wouldn't keep the roof over their heads or save the land Caleb had poured his life into. It wouldn't undo the damage or stop the legal machinery already in motion." That night, alone in the house except for Sarah sleeping in the chair by the fire, Evelyn lay in bed and let herself cry. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she let the fear and exhaustion and grief crash over her without trying to hold it back. She'd come so far, fought so hard, and it still might not be enough. The sound of breaking glass woke her near midnight. She was up instantly, pistol in hand, heart hammering. In the main room, Sarah was already on her feet, rifle ready. The window near the door had been shattered, and flames were spreading across the floor where a burning bottle had landed. "Fire!" Sarah shouted. "Get water!" They moved fast, throwing every container of water they had onto the flames before they could spread. The fire died quickly. Whoever had thrown it hadn't used enough accelerant. But the message was clear. Sarah ran outside, but the attacker was already gone, swallowed by darkness. She came back breathing hard. "Cowards!" Threw it and ran. She examined the bottle. Kerosene? Same as the barn. They're trying to burn me out. Evelyn's hands shook as she set down her pistol. Force me to leave before Caleb gets back. Or kill you. Hard to tell with Arson. Sarah started boarding up the broken window. That's it. I'm sending one of my hands into town to get Coleman. This is attempted murder. Victor's going too far. He won't care. He'll say he was in town, has witnesses. James will back him up. Pike will provide an alibi. Evelyn sank into a chair. We can't prove it was him. Then what do you want to do? That was the question. What did she want to do? Keep fighting? Keep waiting for the next attack? Or finally accept that some battles couldn't be won? She thought about Caleb in that jail cell, probably lying awake worrying about her. About the ranch his family had built that was being stolen piece by piece. About the woman she'd been in Philadelphia, helpless, broken, running. And she thought about the woman she'd become. The one who could split wood and survive floods and stare down men with guns. The one who'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop running was to turn and face what was chasing you. I want to end this, she said, permanently. The next morning, Evelyn rode into town alone. Sarah had tried to stop her, arguing it was too dangerous, but Evelyn had been firm. This was something she needed to do herself. She found Victor at the hotel restaurant, eating breakfast like he hadn't tried to kill her the night before. When he saw her, surprise flickered across his face before settling into that familiar smug satisfaction. Miss Hart, you look tired. Trouble sleeping? She sat across from him without being invited. I want to make a deal. I'm listening. I'll convince Caleb to sell, to take Denver's offer and walk away. I'll testify in court that the ranch is unmanageable, that the flood damage is too severe. Whatever you need to make the sale go through smoothly. She met his eyes. In exchange, you drop the assault charges against Caleb and you leave. Not just the territory, the West entirely. Back to Philadelphia or wherever else, but you never come near me or anyone I care about again. Victor leaned back, studying her. Why would I agree to that when I'm already winning? Because winning isn't enough for you. You want me broken, want to watch me beg. Well, here I am. She kept her voice steady, even though everything in her wanted to scream. I'm offering you complete victory. The ranch sold, Caleb's resistance crushed, and me admitting you were right all along. All you have to do is walk away after. And what makes you think I want to walk away? Maybe watching you suffer is more valuable than any business deal. Maybe. But I know you, Victor. You're bored already. This was fun when I was running, when you were hunting. But I'm offering surrender. Where's the sport in that? She leaned forward. Take the win. Prove you destroyed me. Then move on to your next victim because we both know there'll be one. There always is with men like you. Something shifted in his expression. She'd read him right. The chase had been the point, and she was offering to end it on terms that let him claim total victory. You'd really do it? Convince Caleb to give up everything? If it means you leave us alone after. Yes. He considered, fingers drumming on the table. I want it in writing. You testify, he sells. You both sign affidavits saying Denver Cattle acquired the property fairly. No future lawsuits, no claims of coercion. Fine, but you drop the assault charges today and you're gone within a week of the sale closing. 2 weeks. 10 days. He smiled. Deal. I'll have the paperwork drawn up this afternoon. You and Caleb sign once he's released, and this whole mess is finished. She stood, every muscle in her body screaming to run, to take it back, to do anything except shake the hand he offered. But she forced herself to take it, to seal the deal that would destroy everything Caleb had worked for. One more thing, Victor said as she turned to leave. I want you to know I enjoyed this. Every moment of it. From Philadelphia to here, watching you struggle and fight and ultimately lose. It was worth the trip. I'm sure it was, she said quietly, and walked out before he could see her hands shaking. She didn't go back to the ranch. Instead, she rode straight to the jail where Caleb was being held. Coleman was reluctant, but finally let her in to see him. Caleb looked rough. Unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago. But when he saw her, relief flooded his face. Are you all right? I heard about the fire. I'm fine. Sarah was there. She sat across from him in the small visiting room. Caleb, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. She told him about the deal, about Victor's terms, about the choice she was forcing on both of them. He listened in silence, his expression getting darker with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally. "Caleb, absolutely not. You're not sacrificing everything we fought for to protect me from assault charges I'll beat anyway. Walsh is already working on getting them dismissed." "What if he can't? What if you're stuck in here for weeks? The partition sale hearing happens, you're not there to defend the ranch. James wins by default. Then I lose the ranch. But I don't lose it by surrendering to Victor Hale." He leaned forward. "Evelyn, that land is important, but it's not worth you selling yourself to make him go away. We fight this the right way or we don't fight at all." "The right way is losing." "Maybe. But at least we'll know we didn't betray who we are to win." His voice softened. "You came here running from what Victor did to you. You rebuilt yourself into someone stronger. Don't undo all that by giving him what he wants." "I'm not giving him what he wants. I'm getting him to leave." "By making yourself small again. By playing the victim he always said you were." He reached across the table, taking her hands. "I know you're scared. I know you think this is the only way to protect what we've built. But there's always another way. We just have to find it. I'm tired of looking." "I know. So am I." He squeezed her hands. "But not tired enough to quit. Not yet." She wanted to argue, to make him see reason, to explain that pride and principles didn't matter when you were about to lose everything. But looking at him, stubborn, exhausted, still refusing to break, she understood something fundamental. The ranch wasn't what they'd been fighting for. Not really. They'd been fighting for the right to build something real in a world that kept trying to take it away. Fighting for the possibility that people could change, could become stronger, could choose truth over convenience. If they surrendered now, if they signed Victor's papers and walked away, the land might be gone, but they'd still have that. They'd know they'd fought until the end, that they hadn't been broken, just beaten. But if they gave in, if they chose the easy lie to make the pain stop, that would break them. Maybe not today, maybe not visibly, but eventually. The knowledge that when it mattered most, they'd traded their integrity for safety. "All right," she said finally. "We fight." Relief washed over his face. "Yeah? Yeah. But Caleb, we need a miracle here, because I don't see how we win this. Then we pray for a miracle, or we make one ourselves." The miracle came from an unexpected source. Thomas Walsh, the lawyer, arrived at the jail the next morning with news. Pike from Denver Cattle had made a mistake. He'd been bragging in a bar about the ranch acquisition, had mentioned specific details about the harassment campaign against Caleb. A journalist visiting from back east had overheard, had started asking questions. Within 48 hours, the story broke. A territorial newspaper ran a front-page article about Denver Cattle Company's pattern of intimidation, illegal water diversion, and predatory land acquisition. Named names. Cited sources. Included Pike's drunken admissions about the barn fire and the poisoned horse. The territorial governor ordered an immediate investigation. Denver Cattle's assets were frozen pending review. Pike was arrested for conspiracy to commit arson. And Victor Hale, desperate to avoid being caught up in the scandal, had already fled the territory. Walsh got Caleb released within hours of the article's publication. The assault charges were dropped when the prosecutor saw they were clearly retaliatory. James, sensing which way the wind was blowing, withdrew his partition petition and offered to sell his share of the ranch to Caleb for a fair price, payable over time. They stumbled out of the legal offices into afternoon sunlight, barely able to process that it was over, that they'd won, not through surrender or compromise, but through stubborn refusal to quit until the truth came out. "I can't believe it," Evelyn said as they rode back to the ranch. "Victor just left?" His entire reputation was about to crumble if that investigation touched him. He cut his losses and ran. Caleb looked at her. "You stayed. He ran. Remember that." The ranch was still damaged. The herd was still depleted. The money from James's buyout wouldn't come for months, and rebuilding would take years of hard work. But it was theirs. Fully, legally, finally theirs. Sarah met them at the property line with news that the Territorial Disaster Fund had approved their application. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to start. Enough to buy new cattle, repair the fences, make it through winter. That night, standing on the porch looking out at land they'd almost lost, Caleb turned to Evelyn. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "A damaged ranch, debt that'll take years to pay off, work that'll break your back and test every limit you thought you had." Sounds familiar. "I'm asking anyway. Marry me. Build this place with me. Not as my employee or my help, but as my partner in everything." She looked at him. This man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd taught her that strength wasn't about never falling, but about getting back up, who'd shown her that home was something you built with your own hands, not something you inherited or lost. "Yes," she said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "No more heroic flood rescues. My heart can't take it." He laughed, and it was the first truly free sound she'd heard from him in months. "Deal." They were married by the circuit judge 3 weeks later. Sarah stood as witness. Half the territory's ranchers showed up to celebrate, not because they knew Evelyn and Caleb well, but because they understood what the fight had been about. Protecting what you'd built from people who wanted to take it just because they could. The party lasted until dawn, and when the last guests finally left, Evelyn and Caleb stood together in the rebuilt barn, watching the sun rise over land that had nearly destroyed them but hadn't quite managed it. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering that advertisement? Coming out here?" She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train, scared, desperate, running from a past she couldn't escape. Thought about everything that had happened since. The blisters and storms and floods, the barn fires and threats and legal battles. The slow, painful process of becoming someone new. "Not even once," she said. Because that was the thing about running. You could run 3,000 miles, could change your name and your clothes and your whole life, but you'd still be running, still be the person who fled instead of fought. But if you stopped running, if you found something worth defending and defended it with everything you had, then you weren't the same person anymore. You were whoever you chose to become. Evelyn Hart had come west to disappear. Instead, she'd learned to stand, to fight, to build something real with scarred hands and a stubborn heart. The ranch would always be hard, the land would always be unforgiving, but it was theirs, and they'd earned every brutal inch of it. And that, she'd learned, was the only kind of freedom that actually mattered. Not freedom from hardship or pain or the past, but the freedom to choose what you fought for and who you became in the fighting. 6 months later, when spring finally broke the hold of a brutal winter, Evelyn stood in the same spot where she'd first met Caleb. The ranch looked different now. Better fences, new cattle in the pastures, the barn rebuilt stronger than before. Her hands were calloused, her face weathered. She was stronger than she'd ever been, and harder, but also somehow more herself. A train whistle sounded in the distance. Someone else's arrival, someone else's gamble on a new life. She smiled and went back to work. There was always more work, but now it felt like building instead of surviving. And in the end, that made all the difference.